When you think about badass characters who are as mysterious as they are deadly, you probably think of someone like Star Wars bounty hunter Boba Fett. But there's another character who remains mysterious, who dominates the airways with his aerial combat skills, and who never takes off his helmet. That man is not the Mandalorian, it's not Boba Fett, it's a Cobra pilot known as Wild Weasel. Let's talk about him. Before we start though, let me thank you, whether it's your first time here or you're back for more, for watching the channel. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss all of the content that we upload just like this each and every week. Alright, let's jump into the video. To start the story, we have to start in the real world, in the meaning of his actual code name. The weasel is a vermin mammal in the same family as otters and wolverines, and they used to sneak into chicken coops undetected to eat rodents and chickens right under the nose of the farmers. And so this was the inspiration for the military strategy to defeat enemy ground radar. During the Cold War and the Kennedy administration, the United States military was focused on strategic warfare and strategic air command, and so when they met the Soviet MiGs and the radar-guided SA-2 surface-to-air missiles in North Vietnam, a new strategy and new technology were needed to meet this new tactical threat. Their answer was a top-secret program at Eglin Air Force Base called Project Weasel. They'd outfit F-100 Super Sabres and Navy A-4 Skyhawks with radar warning equipment which would trick the ground radar sites into painting them so that the Ewo could detect their locations. These platforms evolved to one of my favorite planes of all time with its unique dihedral and anhedral wings and rear stabilizers, and that is the F-4 Phantom. Cool plane. The Wild Weasel platforms and strategy, now called SEAD or Suppression of Enemy Air Defense, required pilots with great skill and great bravery, just like those vermin, to sneak in under the eye of the enemy and to catch their prey. Many of these pilots were lost. They became decoys for strike forces while they were trolling for SAMs in the skies above Vietnam. Luckily, the F-4 was an air superiority platform. They quickly began racking up and scoring kills both on the ground and in the air. In fact, a few Wild Weasel pilots earned the status of ace during the war. E&E and aerial combat skills supported their first in, last out motto. They were incredibly brave, incredibly courageous, and incredibly selfless, and incredibly skilled. And so now you understand why the Cobra Rattler pilot would want to be called this name. Not much is known about this pilot, but if we combine Action Force and G.I. Joe file cards, we have ourselves a more complete story. One account tells us that he flew NATO Saab 105s in the Congo against guerrillas and later flew ground attack MiG-17s in Syria. And in Syria, he spent days strafing Israeli tank columns with his MiG until he was shot down with a missile. From here, it said, he went on to Angola to fly with the MPLA. He gained a lot of experience during the Angolan and Rhodesian bush wars in Africa. And funny enough, his file card has a typo, as it was written as Bus Wars. Larry Hama commented that the copy editors at Hasbro left the H out, and so they were to blame for that typo. It should be Bush Wars. Wild Weasel seems to have also been involved in Argentina's Dirty War and Operation Condor during the same time. He used state-of-the-art weapon systems as well as jury-rigged civvy planes retrofitted with weaponry, and he gave him a wide, broad range of knowledge. During these conflicts, he provided ground support and close air support to ground troops. And according to his file card, Wild Weasel was injured during a strafing run and shot through the mouth, which caused his characteristic sibilance in his speech pattern. Action Force says he was dogfighting with Mirages owned by South African rebels, but as he disengaged from the fight, he was hit by ground fire from the opposing forces to the MPLA, called UNITA, and this caused his injury. Two different conflicts, but what's consistent there is that he was shot up and hit in the face with ground fire. He then went on to fly T-28s for the Central Intelligence Agency for Black Book counterinsurgency operations. After being shot down and subsequently recovering, the CIA sent him to El Salvador with Puff the Magic Dragon, the C-47 spooky gunship, to pound guerrilla forces with its massive firepower. After taking a nice amount of money during the stages of his career, Wild Weasel retired to Florida, where he quickly found himself in the employ of the Cobra terrorist organization. They were going to give him lots of money, which attracted him as a mercenary, and unlimited resources and flying opportunity, which attracted him through his love of flying. He quickly became the de facto expert on Cobra aircraft, specifically the Rattler. The Rattler itself was released, packaged of course with a Wild Weasel action figure in 1984. And the Rattler is an impressive platform capable of vertical and short takeoff and landings. It has multiple hardpoints to mount a variety of armaments like air and ground missiles and bomb racks, and is equipped with a nose-mounted 7-barrel 30mm anti-tank cannon. He had a wing-mounted turbofan engines, and also, for this vehicle, got his own commercial. 1984 is also the year that Wild Weasel debuted right alongside Firefly in the 24th issue of Larry Hama's A Real American Hero comic book series through Marvel Comics. In the issue, Major Blood, the Baroness, and Destro were plotting to take over Cobra. They hired Wild Weasel and Firefly to follow the tracking device that Major Blood planted in the handle of one of Storm Shadow's swords. Firefly's name is given, but in his first few panels, Wild Weasel is referred to simply as the gentleman on the left, Cobra's best pilot, or more simply, the pilot. Firefly and Wild Weasel were led to Zartan's lair in the Florida Everglades, where it all leads to a battle with the G.I. Joe team in the jungly swamplands outside of Zartan's lair. Zartan sent Wild Weasel and Firefly out in a water moccasin to fight with the Joes, who had just heloed in, but it's quickly destroyed by the Joe's shark. Now on foot, the two men ran back into the jungle, but they're caught and captured by the G.I. Joe operators nearby. It was Mutt's dog Junkyard that found them hiding up in a tree. So that's how they, along with Tripwire and Torpedo, were able to take them prisoner, although they quickly escaped. The two set up a Malaysian tiger gate trap for the Joes as they pursued them through the marshy wetlands, and finally, as the spike trap is ready to deploy, we finally get Wild Weasel's name, and that's in issue 27. Junkyard triggered the trap, but he was too low to the ground to be impacted by the spikes, and they were all safe. With Firefly and Wild Weasel cornered, Zartan, Baroness, Destro, Cobra Commander showed up, and a close-quarters firefight ensued. But the Joes, outnumbered, disappeared into the thick underbrush and overgrowth between the palms and the banyan trees surrounding them. Destro had 3 rattlers hidden in an oil tank nearby that he, with Baroness and Wild Weasel, hopped in. Destro and Wild Weasel headed back to the swamp as they each had an extra seat and wanted to pick up Cobra Commander and Firefly. Destro's Rattler was shot up and he was forced to eject, so Wild Weasel picked up Cobra Commander, leaving Destro and Firefly stranded in the swamp. For that story, check out the videos I have on both of them. In issue 33, we see Wild Weasel on stage behind Cobra Commander right next to Zartan, Firefly, and Baroness as he gives his rally speech, the same speech that was interrupted by Billy Kessler's assassination attempt. This, along with his presence at Billy's trial in issue 38, make him part of Cobra's high command, his inner circle of followers and contractors. Issue 34 is great. If you love the aerial aspect of G.I. Joe, this is what makes you fall in love with the vehicles, Wild Weasel, with Ace. It's really a starring issue of the whole series. G.I. Joe pilot Ace took a Sky Striker up with LJ as backseat to try out some new ECM pods. At the same time, Wild Weasel took Baroness up in an upgraded Rattler. The Sky Striker quickly shot up to 35,000 AGL while the Rattler dipped down nap of the earth barely 20 feet off the ground, right over the highway, scraping the top of bridges as they shot along the ground. Wild Weasel spotted Ace and lit him up with his radar and fired 2 heat-seeking missiles right at his rear. Ace quickly made use of the new ECM system while also deploying chaff and flares, as is normal procedure. The radio was damaged, but a burst from the 20mm Vulcan on the Sky Striker slammed into the broadside of the Rattler, riddling the airframe around the cockpit with holes. The Rattler answered with a controlled burst from its own turret, blasting through the canopy, shattering Ace's helmet faceplate. LJ took control and chased the Rattler, but Wild Weasel performed a maneuver which put him right behind the Sky Striker. Ace hit up the afterburners and went straight up, disappearing from visual range. Sky Striker picked up the Rattler again and gave chase, skimming the tops of houses and backyard barbecues. They expended all their missiles and they were down to Gatling guns, head on. They fired at each other, and as they crossed paths, their guns emptied. Ace's helmet was off and Wild Weasel's face shield was shattered, giving a small glimpse of his eyes and his face. Badly injured, their planes aflame and smoking, the two pilots did a flyby of each other, saluting out of respect for the skill each pilot displayed in the skies above New Jersey that day. Neither LJ nor Baroness understood the quiet, silent respect the two had for each other as they disengaged and RTB'd. In issue 115, Wild Weasels with Techno Viper T-23 over Benzene, trying to shoot down another G.I. Joe Ace pilot named Ghost Rider and his partner Slipstream, who were flying a Phantom X-19 stealth fighter. They're in Benzene airspace to try to capture evidence that Cobra had terrordromes in that area. Wild Weasel, while in pursuit, was shot down by ground-fired missiles from Rampart and Backblast, preserving Ghost Rider's mission. Then in issue 165, Wild Weasel was reunited with Ace, bringing the two together again after their epic duel in issue 34. Wild Weasel was over the desert, tasked with dropping a payload of bunker buster bombs on the pit, but Ace was flying combat air patrol in the area. He fired Sparrow air-to-airs, but the Rattler deployed chaff and flare, but Ace's missiles kept tracking Wild Weasel. He avoided the missiles and the two pilots had to resort to targeting solutions from their 20 mics. The canyons and ravines around the pit were too narrow for missiles. The two planes were pushed to their limits. We did finally catch a glimpse of Wild Weasel when he flipped up his helmet visor briefly, and you could see his damaged face from his accident that damaged his vocal cords. He's badly scarred, and so that's probably the reason why he likes to leave his helmet on. With Wild Weasel now on his bombing run, Ace met him head on, fired the cannons, igniting Wild Weasel's ordnance. The Rattler and its 1,000-pound bunker buster exploded in a massive fireball above a sandstone butte as the Sky Striker cut through the fireball in the sky. And there were no shoots. With this issue, Wild Weasel's story with the Joes came to a close. Although, Hama could always pull a Han from Fast and the Furious and have him show up randomly in the future. He could easily say that he did make it out and his chute deployed off panel. In non-canon, as part of the America's Elite comic book, Wild Weasel played an important part. Cobra Commander had killed the White House Chief of Staff and actually took his place. He then installed a replacement team to the G.I. Joes called Phoenix Guard. Really, it was his own Cobra agents with new identities, sort of like what Marvel did with the Thunderbolts team. Firefly was called Snake Eater, Zorana was Friday, Scrap Iron was Mech, Copperhead became High Tide, and Wild Weasel was now called Halo. His cover identity was a Chicagoan named Kenneth Leggett, who became infantry for the 82nd Airborne and subsequently recruited to the Phoenix Guard. And this, of course, did not last. The G.I. Joe team does not like him for obvious reasons. However, they do recognize his skill, especially two people, Ace. And one of the Joe's other pilots, Wild Bill, says this about him. He may be a back-shooting, low-down snake in the grass, but the boy can fly like nobody's business. You gotta respect that skunk for that. Hey, what did Voltaire say? To forgive our enemies their virtues. That is the greater miracle. End quote. Wild Weasel was in the Sunbow cartoon as well, often coming wingtip to wingtip with Ace and his Sky Striker. In season 1, he was voiced by Pat Fraley and Michael Bell for the second season. He would always be flying the Rattler into combat against dragonflies or against the Romanoff, like in the Great Alaskan Land Grab, or even against Fort Knox. His V1 figure in 1984 and the long-awaited V2 in 2002 both came boxed with the Rattler plane. In 2003, he came with the Cobra Raven, which was part of the Lego-inspired Spy Troops built to rule line. The next year, Wild Weasel came carded with Gung Ho, and then in 2005, packaged with the Night Adder vehicle as part of the Valor vs. Venom line. Then for V6 in 2008 for the 25th anniversary, he came packaged with Captain Ace and a reprint of issue 115 of the comic book series. He also came that year with the Rattler, which was now a Target exclusive. In 2009, for the ROC line, a Cobra gunship vehicle was released with Firefly. Box art depicted Firefly with a red helmet, and this is because it was originally supposed to be Wild Weasel, as they said at Toy Fair. There was supposed to be another figure for the 50th anniversary line, which would have been exclusive to Toys R Us, but they opted out at the last minute, though not before a few of the prototypes actually made it out. For Action Force, Wild Weasel was called Red Wolf, and he came packaged with this massive thing called the Robo Skull, which took a long time, but it did make it into the comic book series. Hailing from Manchester, England, Red Wolf was an ex-NASA astronaut who was let go from the agency for being corrupt. It trained with Action Force captain named Moondancer, and Moondancer was the one who piloted the 1984 Palatoy vehicle, spaceship called Triad for Action Force's Space Force. And that brings us back to our Star Wars comparison that we started the video with. Red Wolf's Robo-Skull looks to be inspired by a ground attack TIE fighter in its design. Those are the main fighters powered by twin ion engines for the Star Wars Imperial fleet, if you weren't aware. All Wild Weasel versions came with that Stormtrooper-esque helmet that he never took off, preserving the mystique around this awesome character. And so that's it for this one, my friends. Jump down to the comment section so we can continue this conversation. As always, I look forward to your thoughts, comments, additions, and reactions. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you can be one of the first to know when I upload videos just like this each and every week. I'm Jesse, this is JLS Comics, and I'll see you soon.